I'm aware you'll never be enough. There are other things I'm going to want, but underneath the ashes there's a goal that I've unearthed. Every time I count my blessings, I count you first.
Hello, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to my channel, folks. If it's your first time visiting, hello there. Thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate you spending time at my little channel. Today, I wanted to share with you 3 amazing Australian female bushrangers. Although 2 on the list ran with their husbands, they've earned their title bushranger. There are 3 well-known female Australian bushrangers. Marianne Bugg, a half-Aboriginal who rode with Captain Thunderbolt; Mary Cockerell, aka Black Mary, who rode with Michael Howe; and Elizabeth Jessie Hickman, who ran her own gang in the area which is now covered by the Woolamine National Park. Number 1. The Captain's Lady, Marianne Bugg. Marianne was born in Gloucester, New South Wales, on the 7th of May, 1834. Her parents were James Bugg and Charlotte Derby. James was an ex-convict sent to Australia for sheep stealing. He was originally sentenced to death, but was later commuted to life in the colonies. He arrived in 1826 on the convict ship the Sesostris. Marianne's mother, Charlotte, was an Aboriginal woman. Marianne learned to make shelter, find food, and survive in the Australian bush from her Aboriginal family. She was called Yellalong by her Aboriginal family because of her light-coloured hair and pale features. Mary's father sent her to boarding school, where she learned to read, write, and how to become a lady. Life was pretty good for the convicts. He had no chance of his children going to boarding school back in England. In 1848, when Marianne was only 14 years old, she married 38-year-old, that's a big age difference, Edmund Baker, who was a convict sent to Australia in 1831 for stealing rabbits. After they were married, Edmund and Mary moved to Mudgee, and Edmund worked, this is important, for Mrs. Sarah Garbutt. Sarah was also the mother of Frederick Ward, who would later become Captain Thunderbolt. His father was convict John Haswell. There are stories that Mary and Frederick Ward formed an instant attraction to each other, although Marianne was married to Edmund Baker. It is known that Frederick Ward came back for Marianne after he was released from Cockatoo Island. In 1856, Frederick Ward and James Garbutt were sentenced to Cockatoo Island prison for 10 years for receiving stolen horses from Cockerell Station. After 4 years, they were released with tickets of leave. Fred Ward returned to his mother, Sarah Garbutt's farm. Marianne, by this time, had a small child to Edmund Baker. Edmund had died while Fred was in jail. So after Edmund Baker's death, Marianne had returned to Stroud in New South Wales and worked in the local Anglican boarding school. This is pretty good work. She was a pretty intelligent girl. Marianne left with Frederick Ward. Well, she was intelligent until then. Then she absconded her good job. I don't know how good it was in them days, with Frederick Ward, and they moved to Dungog, New South Wales. In 1860, Fred and Marianne were married at Stroud. After Frederick Ward was released from Cockatoo Island, he had to attend muster at Mudgee. He would borrow a horse from his employer for the trip. But in October 1861, he was arrested for arriving late to muster. And although the horse was borrowed, he was actually charged with stealing the borrowed horse. That hardly seems fair. Fred was imprisoned once again on Cockatoo Island. It was only 2 weeks later that Marianne gave birth to their first child, a girl named Marina Emily. As soon as Marina was old enough, Mary left Marina with a neighbour and moved to Balmain, which is a suburb in Sydney not far from Cockatoo Island. She found a job as a housemaid. On the 11th of September, 1863, this is amazing, Marianne swam to Cockatoo Island, avoiding the sharks, with a file for Fred Ward and his friend Fred Britton to cut through their chains. Then they all daringly swam away from the island. And this would have been difficult as the jailers threw offal into the sea around the island to encourage the presence of sharks to stop escapes. I can just imagine her swimming there with this file and helping them escape. That was daring. Marianne hid Fred Ward and Fred Britton in a disused boiler in the Balmain area while they waited for the police to stop searching for them. The police did not let it be known about the escape for some time, as no one had ever before escaped from Cockatoo Island. Fred Ward and Fred Britton rode north, and Marianne followed. After a few weeks, Mary and Fred Ward moved to the Hunter Valley, where Frederick Ward became known as the famous bushranger Captain Thunderbolt. Even though Fred and Mary had 3 children by March 1866, she helped Fred Ward and his gang. She could enter townships to buy supplies, find out what the times that the coaches left the town and what route they would take to make it easier. She could find out any information about police movements or the latest news, and she wouldn't even arouse suspicion. Because she was part Aboriginal, her knowledge of the bush also helped her find food and shelter in the mountains. This included finding, catching, and killing cattle. Marianne dressed like a young man, wearing knee-length Wellington boots, moleskin trousers, shirt, jacket, and a hat, at a time when women certainly did not wear men's clothing. Marianne was very proud to be married to Captain Thunderbolt and referred to herself as the captain's lady. It's got a ring to it, isn't it? It's kind of romantic. Is that right? I'm not sure. With her help, Captain Thunderbolt evaded capture for 6 years, the longest of any bushranger. Marianne also taught Fred Ward how to read and write. What an amazing woman. Mary was a loving mother despite being on the run. Marianne was charged 3 times with receiving stolen goods. Once, while Marianne was being held at a station, Fred Ward, Captain Thunderbolt, rescued her. He returned the favour. I like that. She was released after serving 3 months of a prison sentence. No one is sure how Marianne died because there's 2 death certificates that have been found. She was also known as both Louisa Mason and Yalilong. She was the loyalest of women and stayed with Captain Thunderbolt until the very, very end. Number 2 on my list is Black Mary, Mary Cockerell. Now, information about this lady bushranger is hard to come by, but it was thought that Mary was born in 1798, 1799. Mary was a Tasmanian Aboriginal woman, most likely of the Mohonia people of Nipaluna, which is Hobart. All records, I apologise if I pronounced them wrong, sorry. All records related to Mary only provide her English name given to her by her colonial Cockerell family, with whom she lived and worked as a very young teenager. While staying with the colonists, Mary maintained close ties with her traditional culture and community. She was depicted by her contemporaries as articulate, brave, and resolute. She wore clothes that mixed items from the two cultures, described as neither native nor European, but a very pretty sort of costume made of skins, feathers, and white calico. Mary was a fashion icon way back in the 1700s, maybe early 1800s. When she was only 15 or 16, Mary met Michael Howe, a convict transported to Van Diemen's Land for highway robbery and assigned to a merchant living near the Cockerell family. By April 1815, both Mary and Michael had absconded from their respective assignments to join the infamous Whitehead gang. Some researchers describe Mary and Michael as a dedicated couple, although Michael was overly possessive, allegedly shooting one of his companions for giving Mary a stolen shawl. I wonder if the problem was that it was stolen or that some other bloke was giving his lady a shawl. Probably the latter. He's a bit of a piece of work, Michael. I've got my opinions on Michael. Mary quickly became crucial to the success of the Whitehead gang and Michael's career as a bushranger, using her bush skills to steer the group through the unforgiving Tasmanian landscape and helping them evade capture. In 1817, a contingent of the 46th Regiment was sent to pursue the bushrangers. Mary and Michael were found at Jericho, some 75 kilometres from Hobart. As they fled, Mary wasn't able to keep up with Michael, so he shot her. Perhaps, as has been suggested, he didn't want her to be taken alive. But can you believe it? He shot her. She's been keeping him alive in the bush all this time, and he shot her. Well, Mary survived the attempted murder by the lover she'd kept safe for so long. Mary was reportedly severely injured and outraged by Michael's betrayal. So you should be, girl. That is something else. Determined to see his gang captured, once she recovered, Mary joined the regiment and led the military party another 17 kilometres inland across rugged terrain, and the hunt lasted for 2 days until the trail grew cold. Mary then led the regiment to the discovery of 56 stolen sheep and provided enough information for Michael to eventually be captured. Hell hath no fury. It's true. I told you Michael was a piece of work. Michael only survived about a year without Mary to guide his steps. You see, he didn't know what a good thing he was onto, did he? In October 1818, he was tracked to his hut near the Shannon River in the Highlands. He was cornered, killed, decapitated, and his body buried on the spot. His head was taken to Hobart and displayed as proof he was dead. Mary, on the other hand, received a full pardon, and at her own request, she was sent to Sydney to begin a new life. Sadly, though, while there, she contracted a pulmonary disease and she returned to Hobart, where she was admitted to hospital and died in June 1819, barely 20 years old. What an amazing young woman. Like the crime and that, not so amazing, but amazing. What a great young woman. I'm actually blown away by the women of old, you know, especially in places like Australia and places where it was harsh conditions. Number 3, our very final, was the wild woman of Woolamai, the lady bushranger, Jessie Hickman. Born Elizabeth Jessie Hunt in 1890 in New South Wales, Jessie's mother sold her to a travelling circus when she was just 8. Like, what? By the age of 17, Jessie was a champion rough rider and ring mistress of Martini's buck jumping show. Leaving the circus in 1913, a pregnant Jessie waved her lover Ben Hickman off to war. Shortly afterwards, Jessie gave their son to a friend to raise and headed to Sydney for a life of crime. She wasn't waiting around for Ben to come back from war. Jessie stole cattle, pinched clothing, and dodged the police. I suppose she'd had a pretty unconventional upbringing in the circus. That would have been tough in them days. By 1916, she had served 2 terms in Long Bay Jail and was charged again in 1918. This time, she was acquitted. Well, Jessie headed over the Great Dividing Range to the plains of Woolamai. Utilising her formidable horse riding and bush survival skills, she became a notorious cattle duffer. Jessie escaped arrest time and again by driving her horse and stolen cattle into treacherous gullies, dangerous ravines, places where only the best riders could go. Like, she would put the man from Snowy River to shame. Using the skills she had practiced since a little girl sold to the circus, Jessie lived in caves deep in the mountains. Jessie's infamy drew local men to her side, forming a gang she referred to as her Young Bucks. Their predations on the cattle farmers of Moree earned Jessie the nickname the Lady Bushranger. According to legend, she once escaped capture by plunging her horse over a cliff into the river below, where she couldn't be followed. On another occasion, she allegedly evaded police by climbing out of a locked toilet on a moving train. We don't know how true any of that is. Sometimes a legend gets blurred with the truth, but they're great yarns either way. In 1920, Jessie reunited with Ben Hickman after his return from the war. She's a veterans lady. We're tough. I'm not going to do any cattle duffing though. However, they were married, but then they separated after 4 years of stormy marriage. Ben lived to his old age, unlike another of Jessie's rumoured beaux, who she was accused of killing in self-defense, though his body was never found. It's suspected she buried him somewhere in the bush, never to be found even to this day. Despite evading police again and again, in 1928, Jessie was facing jail once more. She managed to convince the jury that the cattle she was accused of stealing had strayed into her herd by accident. Like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't count them properly. You know, I'm just a woman. You know, what would I know? But after this close call, she scaled her thievery right back, although she didn't get to enjoy living into old age like Ben. In 1936, after years of poor health, Jessie died of a brain tumour. She was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave at Sandgate Cemetery in Newcastle. They kind of had sorry ends, didn't they? That's sad. That completes my list of 3 amazing female bushrangers. I hope you enjoyed today's subject as much as I enjoyed researching this one. I was amazed by some of these, and they were all really quite young women. Let's have a Captain Cook at what's happening in the world today. Today's news headlines that stood out to me were that there was a rare echidna puggle that had been born at Sydney's Taronga Zoo 7 months ago, and it's doing very, very well since its hatching. Apparently, they're quite difficult to breed in captivity, but, you know, even Australia's known animals are wacky. Who knows what might be out there? Today in history, on May the 12th, in 1215, English barons serve an ultimatum on King John, which leads to the creation and signing of the Magna Carta. On May the 12th, in 1789, William Wilberforce makes the first major speech on abolition in the UK House of Commons. He's also well known, I think, as the author of Amazing Grace. I might be wrong, but I think that's him. On May the 12th in 1937, Westminster Abbey saw the coronation of King George VI. Today, I would like to recommend the YouTube channel Briefcase. 2 words, Briefcase. They have great historical crime videos. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed today's topic, or if you have a topic that you would like me to make a video about. Please leave a thumbs up below the screen and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to ding my little bells so you don't miss out on any future content. Consider sharing this video so together we can build this community. I got to get to 500 subs to get off my L plates, Kaz said, so we got to do it. I appreciate and value every single one of you. I hope you can join me tomorrow at the same time. Love and kisses. Bye. See you later, guys.